Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? On a Tuesday. Shandora in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio. Daryl in Tulsa. Gail in Kansas City. Wait a minute. Melissa and Greg Bell in Florida. Shandora in the Bronx. Guy in Ohio, Daryl in Tulsa. It keeps skipping on me, right? I'm sorry. Gail in Kansas City, Bell in Texas, Joe in the Inland Empire, Moishi in Brooklyn, Chaim in Florida, Lester in Florida, and Marie in Freeport. Also, Lucy in Minnesota. Welcome, everybody. Our dafs today double, 73 and 74, and we've already done almost all of 73A. Just a quick revision of the schedule for this week. Tomorrow, Wednesday, class at the regular time. Thursday is Thanksgiving. Yesterday I said that the Thanksgiving class is going to be at noon. Small revision on that. It's going to be 1 p.m. 1 p.m. Pacific. 1 p.m. Pacific. That's an hour later than the Friday schedule. But it's going to be a very short class. Very short class on Thanksgiving at 1 p.m. Pacific and very short. Okay. So our dafs today are 73 and 74, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 8. And we're talking about if offerings, which because of their sanctity have become intermingled with other animals, and we have a mixture, and we don't know which is which, what are we going to do with that? If offerings become intermingled with something that is prohibited to be brought as an offering, what are we going to do with that? Right? Things that are sacred, that are consecrated, they are prohibited, and perhaps they are the minority item in a majority of just regular animals. Or perhaps the offerings are the majority of this group, and something prohibited, like an ox that was sentenced to be stoned, gets mixed in with them. So generally there's an issue here where we don't know which animal is which. And, we would prefer in most situations if the prohibited item could be nullified in a majority of permitted items. But the problem is, even though we'll use that principle in many things, we can't use it with animals because each animal is a significant being in itself. So that's the basis of our discussion here. Pick it up right at the bottom of page 73a. So the Gemara raises a difficulty with the ruling of the Mishnah that all of the animals are prohibited because one prohibited animal fell into a large mixture of permitted animals. And let us draw out and sacrifice one animal from the mixture and say, meaning apply the principle, any item that separates from a group is assumed to have separated from the majority. Accordingly, the animal that was sacrificed is presumed to be fit. So one can continue in this manner until only 2 animals from the mixture remain. And the Gemara questions this suggestion. It says, should we draw out an animal from the mixture? But this is the removal of an item from its fixed place. So some Talmudic principles that we use in other areas. If there was a Jewish town, right? And there were 10 butcher shops in that town, and 9 of them sold kosher meat, and 1 of them sells non-kosher meat. And the Jew goes and he buys meat, and he doesn't remember which store he bought it from. So can you assume that you bought it from a kosher butcher, since that's 9 out of 10? Answer, no, because this is considered a fixed place, right? Of all the butchers that it could have been, it was in one, it might have been in the non-kosher place. And as a sort of, in this situation, we don't consider that it was removed from the mixture. In a fixed place means that the intermingled items are still intermingled. In this case, it's intermingled because you don't know which butcher shop you bought it from. On the other hand, if you find a piece of meat in the marketplace and there are 10 butcher shops, 9 kosher butchers, and 1 non-kosher butcher, now you can assume that it came from one of the kosher butchers, because in this case, the item is considered removed from the mixture, no longer in a fixed place. This is very nuanced. It's a little bit hard to wrap our minds around that in the discussion where this principle is actually derived. They show you how it makes more sense. But for now, this is the idea that basically if the items are still in the mixture, you can't pluck one out and assume that it is among the majority. While it's still in the mixture, it's considered uncertain, and you have to assume that even though it's 10,000 permitted things and 1 non-permitted, since it's still in the mixture, you don't know which one you drew out. We consider that uncertain. If it was already taken out, then we can assume it came from the majority. And I believe that the reason that we use this principle is because it is uncertain. We don't want a person to say, well, I took it out. It must come from the majority. You're not allowed to take it out in that situation. And to discourage taking it out, we have the principle that while it's still in the mixture, it is a case of uncertain and it is not permitted to take it out. If you find it outside the mixture, but you know it came from the mixture, then you can use this principle that it probably came from the majority. Okay, now we're on 73b. So the Gemara is asking, but this is the removal of an item from its fixed place. And we have a principle that anything fixed, right, still intermingled in a mixture of permitted and prohibited, anything fixed is considered as though it was half and half, i.e. equally balanced, and it remains a case of uncertainty. So the Gemara clarifies its suggestion, rather let us push the intermingled animals so that they all move from their places. Now we negate the fixed status of the prohibited item, and we can say that it's as if it has been removed from the mixture, any animal, since they've all been moved. Now whichever one we happen to pick, we can say that it was removed from the mixture. When it was mixed, they were standing over there. Now they've all moved. So it's like we took one out of the mixture, and now we should be able to assume that it's one of the majority. Right? This is a situation where the Gemara is saying, okay, well, let's make use of our Talmudic principles to save, this mixture that's become prohibited due to uncertainty from having to lose all those animals. That's what they're trying to do. So the Gemara clarifies its suggestion. Rather, let us push the intermingled animals so that they all move from their places. This negates the fixed status of the prohibited item. And accordingly, let us say, with regard to each animal, any item that separates from a group, right, you find it outside the group of intermingled objects, is assumed to have separated from the majority, right? So if most of them are permitted, now you can assume that this animal that is separated from the group is from the majority. Can we do that? Rava says, now that the sages have said that we do not sacrifice any of them, that's the ruling in our Mishna. Right? In our Mishna, if you had a bunch of offerings and one prohibited animal that is not fit for sacrifice gets mixed in with them, like an ox that is sentenced to be stoned, now you can't sacrifice any of them. Right? That's where we come out. So we're not applying this principle, obviously. So Rava says, now that the sages have said that we do not sacrifice any of them, so this is evidently a rabbinic decree, lest 10 priests come simultaneously and sacrifice all the animals in the mixture together, not one at a time. Therefore, the fact that there could be a method to permit the animals is immaterial, because then one of the priests would have sacrificed. We'll just keep reading, and then you'll see how it might have worked to do that principle, and how the process that might have worked, doing 2 at a time, so you know that one of them is always permitted until you only have 2 left, that might have worked. But since they're afraid that a bunch of priests will come and not use the procedure that you need to use, where you are going to deal with the uncertainty with this idea of removing from a fixed place, because there could be a double mistake made, the intermingling, followed by multiple priests coming at the same time to sacrifice all the animals, the sages said, no, you can't do that. And that's why our Mishnah does not use this principle that we're talking about now. Now, one of the sages said to Rava, If that is so, do you hold that the large basin on which the sacrificial portions of the animal are placed is prohibited? In other words, is it possible that these animals, which were slaughtered when they were initially declared permitted, after being separated from their places, could later become prohibited again when their sacrificial portions are ready to be burned on the altar? And Rava responded he did not mean that there was a concern that 10 priests would sacrifice their sacrificial portions simultaneously. Rather, the decree is due to the concern lest, when the animals move, 10 priests will come simultaneously and take them from the mixture. As all or most of the animals were separated simultaneously in this case, it is assumed that the prohibited animal is among those that were separated. So the Gemara asks, well, is it possible for 10 priests to take these scattered animals simultaneously? So rather, Rava says that one may not allow the animals to be sacrificed by moving them due to a decree that if this is allowed, one may, in other circumstances, allow them to be sacrificed even when they are taken from a fixed location. As a matter of policy, shall we say, even though we have this Talmudic solution to the problem, if we applied it, it could set a precedent where future mistakes might be made and they might come to sacrifice prohibited animals. And so rabbinic decrees, which are always a fence around the Torah to protect us from coming to violate the Torah, the sages decreed that we cannot use that process in this situation. Rava said, now that the sages say in the Mishna that we do not sacrifice any of the animals, if we did sacrifice one of them, the offering does not effect acceptance for the owner, right? So since the sages said that one prohibited animal fell into a group, became intermingled with a group of permitted sacrificial animals, since one of them is prohibited, we're not going to sacrifice any of them. That's the law. So now if you, by rabbinic ordinance, so then if a person violated that ordinance and took one of the animals as a sacrifice, it was brought on behalf of an owner, right, who needed that sacrifice brought, it will not effect acceptance for the owner. Whatever kind of offering he was trying to bring, it will not be credited to him. If he vowed to bring a burnt offering, he has not yet brought a burnt offering. He was obligated to bring a sin offering, he has not yet brought his sin offering. Rav Huna Bar Yehuda raised an objection to Rava from a Mishna, tractate Kinim 22b, with regard to a bird sin offering that was intermingled with a bird burnt offering, or a bird burnt offering that was intermingled with a bird sin offering. And we know about bird burnt offerings and sin offerings that their procedure is different. Burnt offerings, right, are sacrificed and blood presented on the altar above the red line. Bird sin offerings, sacrificed and their blood presented below the red line, and never the twain shall meet. So now that they become intermingled, we have a problem. They can't be brought in any way that will satisfy both. So even if the ratio is 1 in 10,000, they must all die, as there is no remedy for these birds. It is not known which is which, and their sacrificial rites are performed differently. Now that Mishnah continues, in what case is this statement said? In the case of a priest who consulted the court to ask how he should proceed, right? Sorry, you can't bring any of those birds. But in the case of a priest who did not consult the court, and he thought that the solution was to sacrifice them anyway, and just do them all as burnt offerings or all as sin offerings, then what would we rule then in that situation after the fact? He shouldn't have done that, but he did that. So if there was an equal number of bird sin offerings and burnt offerings, equal number, and he performed all their sacrificial rites above the red line, which is required for burnt offerings, then half of the birds are fit. As in any event, the burnt offerings were sacrificed properly and half are unfit. If we know, let's say that there's 5 birds designated to be a sin offering and 5 birds designated to be a burnt offering, and the priest took all 10 and he sacrificed them above the line, okay, so 5 of them that were burnt offerings were sacrificed properly, and the 5 that were sin offerings were not sacrificed properly. So we don't know which is which, but we know that 5 of the 10 were brought properly. So if one person was bringing all these birds as his offerings, we would know that at least his burnt offerings have been taken care of. And likewise, if he performed all their sacrificial rites below the red line, half are fit, as in any event the sin offerings were sacrificed properly, and half are unfit. But if he performed the sacrificial rites of one of the birds below the red line and one of the birds above the red line, in the case where there were two birds, well, now they are both unfit. As I say, that the sin offering might have been sacrificed above the red line, and the burnt offering could have been sacrificed below. So both of them might have been done wrong, and we can't assume that either one of them was done right. And this Mishnah proves that an offering that is prohibited to be sacrificed as part of a mixture is fit after the fact, which contradicts the statement of Rava. Okay, he shouldn't have been brought them that way. But if he did, then we're going to rule that, well, since we know that half of them were brought properly, okay, so half of them are considered fit. Half of them did their job. Rather, so since after the fact we're making that ruling, it must be that even though they became intermingled, it is possible to bring them, although we prohibit people priests from bringing them ab initio, lechatchila. But bedi eved, after the fact, they're credited as proper sacrifices. So, rather, Rava would claim that this matter depends on a dispute between Tanaim. This statement of Rava is in accordance with the opinion of the one who says that living creatures that become disqualified are permanently rejected from being sacrificed on the altar, and this animal was rejected when it was part of the mixture. So once it became intermingled, and we have a ruling from the sages that you can't bring it, so now it is permanently rejected according to one view. And that ruling of the Mishnah and Tractate Kinim is in accordance with a different opinion, the opinion of the one who says that living creatures are not permanently rejected from the altar. Therefore, if the animal was sacrificed, it is fit. Shouldn't have been done, but now that it was done, we accept that the atonement was made, or the offering was, or the obligation was fulfilled, and so it was a fit sacrifice because we know that at least half were done correctly. Now, the Gemara raised a difficulty. But there is the case of slaughtered offerings. Okay, slaughtered. So we're talking about animal offerings, not birds. Animals get shechted, not melika. But there is the case of slaughtered offerings that are rejected from the altar, concerning which everyone agrees that these are rejected. Even those who say that living creatures generally are not rejected agree that in this case they should be rejected. Now we're on 74a. And we learned in a Mishnah, we will learn on page 77b, that in a case where sacrificial portions from unblemished burnt offerings became mixed with sacrificial portions from blemished burnt offerings, right? Sacrificial portions means the animal was already slaughtered, the blood collected, the blood was sprinkled. But then there's the portion of the animal, or for burnt offering, most of the animal, that is going to go up on the altar and be consumed by the altar. And here, there were offerings that for some reason became disqualified, like maybe the priest had the wrong offering in mind, and other burnt offerings that remain qualified. But these, pieces of meat, essentially, from these already sacrificed, blood presented properly, butchered animals, that now their meat became mixed, and we don't know which sacrificial portions are still fit and which are disqualified. Okay. In a case where sacrificial portions from unblemished burnt offerings became mixed with sacrificial portions from blemished burnt offerings, which are disqualified, the sacrificial portions from blemished burnt offerings are disqualified. So when this intermingling happens, Rabbi Eliezer says, if the head of one of them was sacrificed on the altar before they knew of the blemish, all the heads should be sacrificed, as it is assumed that the head of the disqualified animal was the one already sacrificed on the altar. And this indicates that even with regard to slaughtered animals, if they were rejected from the altar due to being in a mixture, they are not permanently rejected, but are fit after the fact, at least in this situation that we just described. So the Gemara explains that this Mishnah affords no proof. As Rabbi Eliezer states his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Hanan the Egyptian. Hanan the Egyptian was a great sage, and there's actually two sages with the name Hanan the Egyptian. For whatever reason, though they are great sages who have rulings in the Talmud, they did not get smicha, right? They were not, they did not receive the title of rabbi in Talmudic times. Smicha in Talmudic times, much harder title to receive than the title of rabbi today. Much more exclusive. It meant that you were a great sage. Okay, so Hanan, so this is in accordance with the ruling of Hanan the Egyptian, who maintains that even slaughtered animals are not permanently rejected. As it is taught in a baraisa that Hanan the Egyptian says, with regard to the 2 goats of Yom Kippur, the one sacrificed to God and the scapegoat designated to be sent out to Azazel in the wilderness, even if the blood of the sacrificed goat is already in the cup where it was collected, and the scapegoat dies before it can be cast off in the wilderness, the sacrificed goat is still a fit offering, and the priest brings another goat and joins it to the slaughtered goat to serve as the scapegoat. By contrast, the other Tanaim, who maintain that slaughtered animals are rejected, hold that once they have become rejected due to being in a mixture, they are no longer fit for sacrifice, as stated by Rava. Now, concerning a similar case, Rav Nachman says that Rava bar Avu says that Rav says. With regard to a ring used in idol worship, this doesn't mean that somebody, bowed to the ring. It means that there was, for example, an idolatrous statue, and this ring was used to decorate the statue. It was a human statue in the form of a human, and this ring was on the finger of this idolatrous statue. Okay, it was used in idol worship. Therefore, it becomes prohibited to benefit from that ring. It is prohibited to derive benefit from it. And this ring is not nullified even in a ratio of 1 in 100. Okay, so there was this ring used in idolatry and it fell in with a box of rings, and there was 1 ring used for idolatry and 100 rings that weren't. So now the whole mixture is prohibited. All the rings are prohibited because among them there is 1 ring that was used in idolatry. And this happened. That was intermingled with 100 permitted rings. And subsequently, one of them fell into the Great Sea. Now, this is fascinating. Can you take one of them and throw it in the Red Sea, the Great Sea? That's the Yam Hagadol. This refers to the Mediterranean Sea, right? So if you had this prohibited mixture, and there was 1 prohibited ring and 100 permitted rings, you can't take advantage of the principle we're now going to describe. You can't take one of the rings and throw it in the sea. But if somehow it happened that one of those rings fell in the sea, then they all become permitted. What? How is this possible? And the reason is that we say that the ring that fell into the Great Sea is the prohibited ring. How could we possibly make such an assumption? Because this is now subject to a procedure where when we now make use of these rings, we're always going to pull out 2 at a time. And so we know that even if one of them happens to be the prohibited ring, certainly the other one is going to be a permitted ring. And we'll keep pulling 2 at a time. And so, when we sell these rings or make use of these rings, we'll know that we were never, entirely making use of something that was prohibited until we get to the end, and then we'll see what we do there. Okay, so Rava raised an objection to Rav Nachman from the Mishna. With regard to all the offerings that were intermingled with animals from which deriving benefit is prohibited, even if the ratio is 1 in 10,000, they all must die. So how can you now say that where a ring that was used for idolatry and that fell into a box with 100 permitted rings, and then if one of them happens to fall in the ocean, they all become permitted? How? According to the opinion of Rav, that we say that the one was lost is the prohibited item, why must they all die? In other words, okay, so they're going the other way. So if we have this principle that we could, if one of the rings fell into the sea, now it renders all the rest of the rings permitted, why can't we apply the same principle to the mixture of, offerings and a prohibited animal? So, okay, if one of them becomes lost, do they now all become permitted using the same principle? Our Mishnah didn't say so. Why not? Let us say that with regard to them, so according to the opinion of Rav, that we say that the one that was lost is the prohibited item, why must they all die? Let us say with regard to the first animal that died, right? So we had this mixture, one prohibited animal, 10,000 permitted animals. Okay, we wait until one of them dies. One of them dies. We say, okay, well, that was the prohibited one. Let's use the same principle of Rav, and then the rest of them become permitted. Why can't we do that? Let us say, with regard to the first animal that died, that the prohibited animal died, and the rest should be permitted. So Rav Nachman said to Rava, Rav states his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. As we learned in the Mishna, the Rabbi Eliezer says, if the head of one of them is sacrificed on the altar before the priest knew of the blemish, all their heads should be sacrificed, as it is assumed that the head of the disqualified animal was the one already sacrificed on the altar. Again, once you realize you have an intermingling, then you can't take one out. But if one was taken out before you realized you had this mixture, then you can rely on this idea that, well, it was the prohibited one that was already lost, already gone. So Rava said to Rav Nachman, well, but doesn't Rabbi Eliezer say that Rabbi Eliezer permitted the sacrifice of all the heads only if they were sacrificed 2 by 2, as at least one of them is certainly permitted, but it did not permit them to be sacrificed 1 by 1 in case the priest sacrifices the prohibited head by itself. How then can Rav Nachman permit the rings without qualification? Must be that you're pulling out 2 rings at a time. And Rav Nachman said to Rava, I too am saying that Rav permits the rings only if they are sold 2 at a time, in which case one of them is certainly not from idolatry. Now the Gemara discusses a similar case. Rav says, with regard to a ring used in idolatry that was intermingled with 100 permitted rings, and then 40 of them became separated to one place, and the other 60 became separated to another place, so that there are now 2 distinct groups of rings. There are 2 groups, and of the original 100, one of them was prohibited, and we don't know which. So it is a possibility that the prohibited ring is in the group of 40, and there's a possibility that the prohibited ring is in the group of 60, and we don't know which it's in. Okay. So with regard to a ring that was intermingled with 100 permitted rings, and then 40 of them were separated to one place and 60 to another, so that there are now 2 distinct groups of rings. So if one ring from the group of 40 became separated from them, and then it got intermingled with the group of 60, it does not render them prohibited. But if one ring from the group of 60 became separated from its group and became mixed with the group of 40, it does render them prohibited. I don't know why. Let's keep reading. So the Gemara asks, what is different concerning the case in which one ring from the group of 40 got separated and then became intermingled with the 60, that it does not render those rings prohibited? The reason is that we say the prohibited ring is in the group that contains the majority of the rings, i.e. the group of 60. So if so, in the case where one ring from the group of 60 became separated and became intermingled with the other rings, we should also say that the prohibited ring is still in the group that contains the majority of rings, i.e. it is one of the 59 remaining rings. But it was separated, right? So rather, Rava's statement was as follows. If all 40 became separated to one place where they became intermingled with the other rings, the 40 rings do not render those other rings prohibited, as it is assumed that the prohibited ring is in the group of 60. Conversely, if all of the 60 rings became separated to another place where they became intermingled with, other random rings, then we say that all those random rings are prohibited because the prohibited ring was more likely in the group of 60, and it was those rings that now became intermingled with these other rings. Now, Rav Yehuda, who said this statement, citing Rav, added, now when I said this ruling in the presence of Shmuel, that if the 40 rings became intermingled with others, they do not render them prohibited, he said to me, disregard this halakha with regard to the case of idolatry, as this prohibition is so stringent that its uncertainty and its compound uncertainty are prohibited forever, i.e. no matter how many uncertainties are added, they are all prohibited. Right? So remember, there's different reasons why something could be prohibited. Good prohibition, because it's consecrated. It's an offering. It belongs to the most holy. Right? It's prohibited for the rest of us because, for example, if it's teruma, only a priest can eat it. Or bad prohibition. It was used for idolatry. It was an ox that killed a person and was sentenced to be stoned. Prohibited for that reason. Idolatry is one of the most stringent kinds of prohibitions there is, and therefore, even if it's in a minority and a vast majority, we're going to prohibit the vast majority that it becomes intermingled with. And then if we remove one ring from that vast intermingled group and put it in with yet another group, where it's so unlikely that we picked the 1 in 10,000 that was the prohibited item, and now we mixed it in with another 10,000, because of the stringency of the prohibition on idolatry, we're going to prohibit even the second group of 10,000. Right? It was uncertain which group was in the 10,000. Now we're uncertain if we took the wrong ring and put it into the second group of 10,000. The first group is uncertainty. Now the new situation with the second group is compound uncertainty. And so in the case of idolatry, because it's so stringent, even a compound uncertainty could result in a prohibited mixture, which is to tell you that if the stringency is not as severe as the prohibition on idolatry, then perhaps we would prohibit a mixture due to uncertainty, but we would not prohibit a mixture due to compound uncertainty. The Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Shmuel from a Baraisa. An uncertainty of idol worship is prohibited, but its compound uncertainty is permitted. Right? This definitely contradicts what Shmuel just told us. How so? With regard to a cup that was used in idol worship that fell into a storeroom full of cups, they are all prohibited. Right? That could be 1 cup in 1,000 cups. All of them are permitted, but a prohibited cup fell among them because it was used for idolatry. Now all 1,000 cups in that storeroom prohibited. That's uncertainty. If one of these cups separated from the rest and fell into a group of 10,000 other cups, and from the 10,000 cups a single cup fell into 10,000 other cups, they are permitted. This Baraisa teaches that only one uncertainty is prohibited, not a compound uncertainty, contradicting Shmuel's opinion. And the Gemara explains this is a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna, as it is taught in a Baraisa in Terumos 5:10, that Rabbi Yehuda says prohibited pomegranates from Badan. Now we're back to the issue of something that is so significant that it can't be nullified in a mixture, including these very special pomegranates from Badan, which are always sold by the unit, never in a bunch, because they're rare and special. Rabbi Yehuda says, prohibited pomegranates not because they're pomegranates from Badan, they're prohibited. They're prohibited because they were set aside to be teruma or something else prohibited them. But they're significant, and that's why they're not going to be nullified in a mixture. Prohibited pomegranates from Badan, which are too significant to be nullified, prohibit a mixture in any amount. How so? If one of them fell into a group of 10,000 other pomegranates, and one of that group fell from that 10,000 into another 10,000, they are all prohibited, despite the fact that this is compound uncertainty, and there's no mention of idolatry. Could be any prohibition, according to what we just heard. The Baraisa continues that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, if a prohibited pomegranate fell into a group of 10,000 pomegranates, they are all prohibited, as he concedes that these pomegranates are not nullified in a majority because they're special, significant pomegranates that are always sold by unit, not by bunches. But if one pomegranate from the 10,000 fell into a group of 3 pomegranates, and one of the 3 pomegranates fell into a different place, it is permitted, as this is a compound uncertainty. And we don't restrict by compound uncertainty. You notice that it also fell out of the second group. Why did it fall out? Why does it say that? Can't we just pluck it out? No, right? Because you need it to fall out by itself so that it was removed from the fixed place, removed from the intermingled mixture. Now the Gemara inquires, in accordance with the opinion of which of these Tanaim does Shmuel state his opinion that an item used for idolatry remains prohibited no matter how many uncertainties are involved? if you say that he stated his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, then even with regard to other prohibitions, a compound uncertainty should be prohibited, as Rabbi Yehuda stated his ruling with regard to a prohibited pomegranate, not an item of idol worship. And if Shmuel stated his ruling in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, then even in the case of idol worship, a compound certainty should be permitted, as Rabbi Shimon did not differentiate between different types of prohibitions. And if you would say that there is a difference according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon between idolatry and other prohibitions, and he prohibits compound uncertainties only in the case of idolatry, well then, if so, that which is taught in the Baraisa cited previously, that an uncertainty of idolatry is prohibited but its compound uncertainty is permitted, whose opinion does that represent? It is neither the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda nor the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. And the Gemara answers, actually the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, as he permits a compound uncertainty in all cases. And Shmuel holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, with regard to one matter, that a compound uncertainty is prohibited in the case of idolatry, and he disagrees with him in regard to one matter, as Shmuel does not apply this stringency to other prohibitions, i.e. prohibitions that are not caused by idolatry. New topic. The Gemara continues its analysis. The master, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, citing Rabbi Shimon, said above, if one pomegranate from the 10,000 fell into a group of 3 pomegranates, and one of these 3 pomegranates fell into a different place, the mixture is permitted. So now we're on 74b. And the Gemara asks, what is different about a case where the pomegranate fell into a group of 3 other pomegranates? The essential factor is that there is a majority of permitted pomegranates which nullify the pomegranate that fell from the 10,000. Even if it fell into a group of 2 others, there is a majority of permitted items. Why did they specify a group of 3? And the Gemara explains, what is the meaning of 3 that the Tana of the Brisa teaches? It means that there were 2 permitted pomegranates initially, and the pomegranate of uncertain status fell into them for a total of 3. Now the Gemara returns to the question concerning the opinion of which Tana is followed by Shmuel, who is stringent with regard to a compound uncertainty involving idolatry. And if you wish, say instead that Shmuel holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, as he is similarly stringent with regard to mixtures of items of idolatry, as explained in Tractate of Avodah Zarah, page 49b. Now a related topic. Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish is the other name for Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Reish Lakish says, in the case of a barrel of teruma produce, teruma, when the temple is standing in Jerusalem and produce is being grown in the Holy Land, when a farmer harvests his produce, the first 2% is set aside as teruma. That is given to a priest. He can choose which priest. And both the teruma has to be in a state of purity and the priest has to be in a state of personal purity when he eats the teruma. He can also share it with his household, but no non-priest or non-member of a priest's household can eat teruma. This is consecrated food that is prohibited for non-priests, or at least people who are not the member of a priest's household. So if teruma becomes intermingled with non-teruma, that mixture is going to be prohibited. Reish Lakish says, in the case of a barrel of teruma produce, which may be eaten only by a priest and his household, that was intermingled with 100 barrels of non-sacred produce, they are all considered as teruma, as a sealed barrel is significant and is not nullified. And if one of these barrels fell into the Dead Sea, all the barrels are permitted, as we say, since there is that barrel that fell. The assumption is that it is the prohibited barrel that fell by itself. You can't pluck one barrel out and throw it in the Dead Sea. The Gemara comments, and it was necessary for the Gemara to record the ruling of Rav Nachman with regard to rings used in idol worship, and it was also necessary for the Gemara to record the ruling of Reish Lakish with regard to barrels of teruma. They sound very similar, but they're not. Right? One is prohibited because the ring was used for idolatry. The other is prohibited because the barrel contains teruma, which is consecrated food fit only for priests and their households. And why do we need both rulings? Despite the similarity between the two cases, The Gemara elaborates, as if the law were taught only from the ruling of Rav Nachman, I would say that this matter applies only with regard to a mixture involving an item of idolatry which has no permitting factors. Such items themselves cannot be permitted in any other manner. Therefore, the law is to be lenient, i.e. to assume that the prohibited ring fell into the sea. But in the case of teruma, which has permitting factors, as the mixture can be sold in its entirety to priests, so perhaps the mixture should not be permitted because one of them fell into the sea. There's something you can do with it. If you're going to consider all the barrels to be teruma, okay, well, they could be sold to priests. And so priests can eat it. Priests, of course, can eat non-teruma. So since the teruma that's in that mixture will end up being eaten only by priests, there's a fix. Whereas a ring used for idolatry has no fix. So you might have thought that you will nullify the rings, but you will not nullify the barrels of teruma. Therefore, we need the ruling of Reish Lakish. And conversely, if the law was taught only from the ruling of Reish Lakish, I would say that the law is lenient only in the case of a barrel of teruma, as its falling is noticeable, and everyone will know that the other barrels were permitted due to the one that fell. Accordingly, they will not come to permit barrels in a similar case where no barrel became separated from the mixture. But with regard to a ring whose falling is not noticeable, perhaps the rest of the rings should not be permitted. Therefore, both statements are necessary. You might have thought that we don't do that, that we can't make use of this principle because rings are not noticeable when one of them falls, and people might come to make a mistake and just assume that we're permitting the box of rings because it was 1 in 100. That's not why. We're permitting them because one of them fell by itself, and they were going to say that the prohibited is the one that fell. But we can't pluck it out. Again, I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rabbah says, Reish Lakish deemed the rest of the items permitted only in the case of a barrel, as its falling is noticeable. But in the case of a fig that fell from a group of figs that contained a fig of teruma, Reish Lakish does not deem the rest of the figs permitted, as the one that fell is too small for its fall to be discernible. And Rav Yosef says Reish Lakish deemed the rest of the items permitted, even with regard to a fig. And the reason is that just as the initial falling of one fig rendered the entire mixture permitted, so too the emerging of one fig from the pile permits the rest. Same principle as the barrels, even though the accidental falling of one fig is such a smaller type of event, nevertheless it does permit the rest. Rabbi Lazar says, with regard to a barrel of teruma that fell among 100 barrels of non-sacred wine, it cannot be nullified in its current state, as sealed barrels are significant and are therefore not nullified. How should one proceed? He should open one of them so that it is no longer an item of significance, and take from it as much as ought to be taken from a normal mixture of teruma and non-sacred produce, i.e. 1/100th, and he should give that to a priest, and then he may drink the rest of the wine. Interesting. Sounds like, but that's being done purposefully. Rav Dimi sat and said this law, and Rav Nachman said to him, I see the ruling of swallow and drink here, i.e. this formulation indicates that one may act in this manner ab initio, not wait for an accident to happen, which is puzzling. So rather say, if one of the barrels was opened, after the fact, one may take from it as much as ought to be taken from a normal mixture of teruma and non-sacred produce. And he should give that to a priest, and then he may drink the rest of the wine. But he can't act that way ab initio, lechatchila. With regard to the same issue, Rabbi Oshaya says, in the case of a barrel of teruma wine that was intermingled with 150 barrels of non-sacred wine, and 100 of them opened, one may take from it as much as ought to be taken from a normal mixture of teruma and non-sacred produce. He should give that to a priest, and then he may drink the rest of the wine. And as for the rest of the 50 barrels, they remain prohibited, as they have teruma status until they are opened and the ratio of teruma is separated from them. And this is because we do not say that the prohibited barrel is in the group that contains the majority of barrels, and the one he opens is likely permitted. That's where we'll knock off. I'm not seeing any questions or comments. So reminder, tomorrow, Wednesday, class at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Thursday, Thanksgiving, special time, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Very short class on that day on Thanksgiving. And with God's help, see you tomorrow. All the best.